sometimes you have to have those kind of things to get to the other side where you can be in those spaces. There's so many rules about how things are supposed to be. And so when your intuition contradicts some of those rules and expectations, I think that we begin to feel like, oh, I need to do this, or my voice isn't, right. But I think when your intuition is encouraged early on to trust it, and when you start to test it and you're like, okay, when I listen, it works, and when I don't, it doesn't, then you have to build your own muscle, your own trust muscle for yourself.
Why did you write that book?
It was time. It really, so I created that protocol in 2006. And it was just something that was growing in me, that I was practicing, that I was living. And then I put it into practice around 2012. And so I was teaching it, and people were really vibing with it, right? So my clients are like, this makes sense. And then finally I had a client who said, Nancy, the protocol is great, but when you're not in the room, we don't know how to use it. Like we need to practice. And so that was kind of the beginning of this needs to get in writing. It started with the RIR, which is recognize, interrupt, and repair, right? And it was basically what I was thinking about is, how do you break down a conversation so that you can show up fully, right? So that you can engage and not be defensive. And so the recognize, where I think when we're triggered, our recognize is always external. Like, I recognize that you just said something that triggered me or hurt me. And so what this did was like, but what do I feel about that? So I know that I'm feeling something, but we're not actually used to slowing down long enough to analyze what that feeling is. And so the first R was about, okay, when you trigger me, what are you triggering in me? So is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Whatever it is. And then what is my reaction if I don't ride my emotional wave? Because that's how a lot of discourse happens, right? A lot of disagreements and things happen because you say something, I've taken it, I'm offended now. When I'm offended, I get a little, mouthy, right? And so now I'm mouthy at you and we're doing this. And so I was like, well, what happens if, okay, I know I'm offended, and I know that when I get offended, I get mouthy or sarcastic in my case. What would happen if I could ride that wave and just like kind of take a deep breath and just push it down for a minute and get to a place of inquiry, which is the second I, right? So if I can say, okay, did I hear you right? Like seek to understand first before I start going off the off the edge.
Some people want to go off. Like if you feel wronged, right? Some people just want to go there, right? And so how do you, like with the recognize, for people who, because I consider that some people are hotheads, right? Some people just, don't have that emotional regulation that I think
that would be beneficial.
Right. That would be beneficial. Like they don't have that.
Yeah.
And how do you, I guess, teach somebody to recognize when they just don't have emotional regulation in the first place?
Yeah, it's practice. And we actually created a deck of cards for them to practice. We encourage people creating their own scenarios to practice because, funny enough, the recognize is almost harder than the interrupt for a lot of people. Because again, we've got these walls up that, I'm protecting myself. So I'm not going to acknowledge that you hurt me. I'm not giving you that, right? Even though all of our actions, we stop eating, or we eat too much, or we get depressed, or we start binging something, our body is reacting to that, but we're not acknowledging it. So there's a disconnect between what our heart and our head are doing. We don't know ourselves well enough. And so we just know, like, I go off. So, don't make me go off. Well, no one makes you do anything. You allow them. And when you actually say that, don't make me do this, you're actually giving that person your power. And so for me, I always think about that. It's like, do you control me or do I control me? and I don't want you controlling me. And so you're
Right.
not going to make me go off. So I can choose. And this is the thing that I think is key to understanding compassionate dialogue in the protocol is that I have this line of questioning that says, how do you feel when you feel this way? How do you react? Is it the reaction you want? And if your answer is, and does it have the impact you want? If your answer is yes, then you don't need, if you want to go off, then do you, right? But if your answer is no, then you get a choice to do something differently, to reclaim your power. And so the protocol is really speaking to those people. If you're happy going off on people, then that's your journey, right? But if you want to interact a different way, if you leave those interactions feeling bad and feeling sad and feeling guilty and all whatever those adjectives are, then there's another way.
How did you get to like this being the perfect example or the perfect way to talk about race?
It's that's a really good question. I think it's the perfect way to talk about anything. It's just that my focus is race, right? And so, and what I found is that using the protocol allows the user to be vulnerable, and I think that that's key. So I can be vulnerable, and I can be willing to take a risk to lean in and share what I'm feeling with someone who I might perceive as trying to hurt me, right? But someone's got to start that, right? Because both of us have got defenses up. So if I can show up vulnerable, what I have found, and I'm not exaggerating, that 90% of the time people meet me where I am. So when I soften, they soften. Sometimes you have to have those kind of things to get to the other side where you can be in those spaces, right? We have to be willing to take a risk and know that we've got our kind of defense in the back pocket. I think that's the best way to say it, right? Like, I know if you don't respect my vulnerability, then I can put that defense back up,